Hello everyone, it's Ran here. Welcome to my room, guys. Happy Sunday. Today we're gonna take a step back a little bit and look at the different personality discourses, models, theories that you may come across in the course of your existence, and some fundamental features that are not often talked about. I want to take an overview of three main kinds of personality theories or models, and being able to identify these as different kinds, as different classes, as different categories may also help you not only get a sense of what's on offer, the various pros and cons of each theory or each model, and also navigate what's most for you, and I think in a more general sense, it will allow you to understand ways in which you can have at least some kind of informal criterion for comparing the worth of each. Too often, what happens in our loose and buzzing personality community writ large is that we think we have different models. We have Jungian cognitive functions. We have C.S. Joseph's model. We have objective personality. We have my model, and so on and so forth. How do you, should you just assume what's the standard for determining which one is the best, which one is not the best, which one is the worst, which one should you go for? In this, the assumption is that it's an inarticulated or non-articulated assumption is that the models are more or less equivalent and they can be judged according to similar standards. And the argument that I'm going to make in this video is that they're actually quite different. They answer different purposes and they have to be recognized as such so that we can be more fair in assessing them. Both fair to the models themselves, and to our own interests, right? Because it may turn out that we are more interested in a particular kind of approach to assessing and discussing personality type than another approach. Okay, so before I move on, speaking of personality type, if you're familiar with the INFJ personality, which is my personality in JCF language, I've written a book on the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality. It's the reference book on the type. If you want a deep understanding, get the book. The link is below. You can also get my novel, The Infinite Castle. The rumor has it the main character is an INFJ, so an exploration of a dark, tortured INFJ from a fictional perspective, if you like that, and if you're into Camus, existentialism, Murakami, Dostoevsky, Kafka, this might just be for you. Check the links, and you can support me on Patreon. The link is below, anywhere from $3 a month. That helps massively when there's many of you providing support. Helps to keep me going, so thank you very much. Okay. So I said in my introduction that there are three main categories of personality theories, personality models that you can use to determine your type. Right. So far as I can tell, we can come up with a very useful sort of three-forked classification. And here it goes, because you'll see. Once I've explained this, we'll illustrate and you'll be able to see with me, hopefully, that these different approaches answer different purposes, and you may not be interested equally, or you might consider that you need to have all the perspectives in order to have the maximal amount of information about type that you would like to have. So what I would say is, number one model, right, is objective, but about subjective content. It's about subjective content of what people say. Okay, so it's an objective classification of the subjective contents of people's language, of people's discourse. All right. Number two, it's an objective model about the objective features of people's types that are not about their subjective first-person language, the contents of their thoughts. It's about their physical cues, it's about their visual cues, it's about their body language. Right? So this model attempts to identify the maximal objectivity about your type. Your type is not up to you, is essentially what this model says. And the third model, which is my model, takes an approach that is objectively about subjective experiences, not in terms of the content of the experiences and the thoughts, but about the form of the experiences and the thoughts. Right? So this might all sound a little bit confusing. So I'll start with the first one, okay? So the first one I said is objectively about the subjective contents of people's thoughts. That's JCF, that's MBTI, okay? What MBTI is essentially saying is that there are objectively lots of different people who have expressed thoughts, and on the basis of what these thoughts are, we can identify whether they are INFJ or ISTP or ISFP or and so on and so forth. Okay, so we express, or they speak a certain way, and they have opinions, and they feel like the substance of what they talk about, the content of what they talk about, whether they tend to embrace more mystical interests or more computer science interests or more literary interests. That's going to be fed into what is objectively going to be determined as what their type is. The most opposed to this, and now the sun is coming back, so I have to take some precautions here. The most opposed to this, my friends, is the objectively objective model, right? That's the cognitive type model, that's cognitive typology. I've talked about these guys before. You can check their voltological method if you're familiar with it, but essentially, this is something that they've done for me. They look at me, they take, for example, this video, and they look at the way that my lips move, they look at the way that my eyes drift off, they look at the way that my shoulders, do I have shoulder shrugs? They look at whether I have projecting hands with meticulous hands. They look at the kind of eye toggles that I have. Are they kind of, what they call brushstroke or pointed? And they have, whether my posture is more rigid or more fluid. All these, it's a complicated, intricate system, perpetually evolving to determine what's your type, So here, the idea is that type's not up to you in any way. It's not about the subjective contents of your experience. Okay, your type is fundamentally to be determined in terms of factors completely outside your subjective control. Right? There's no way to fake your type in a way, and there's no way to influence what type you are. Someone could try, someone could do research into the way that the body language of an INFJ is, for instance. But usually, if you're not of that type, it's almost impossible to do that credibly, because a lot of this stuff happens in like milliseconds, so you don't have a lot of control over it, or if at all. And finally, the model that I talk about, that I embrace for myself, is certainly not like this, because it does say also that there's objectively types, but that those types are to be classified in terms, so not of their external body language, but also not in terms of the subjective contents of their thoughts. Right? It's very important to appreciate the difference between subjectivity in terms of the content of what you say, and subjectivity in terms of the quality and form of what you experience. Right? So when I say and I say this in the Ecstatic Soul, I will say this in my future book, there's a certain INFJ way of experiencing the world, of experiencing all the phenomena of existence. That doesn't really say anything about the content of the experience. It's about how you experience things, not what you experience. Okay? So when I talk of alienation or haziness, of prescience. The aboutness of these things is not that important, you know. Haziness about what, or alienation about what. It's more that whatever you experience is filtered through alienation, or filtered through haziness, or filtered through disembodiment. It's not about whether INFJs are into philosophy, or are into nursing, or are into reading books with each other, or feel misunderstood. These are all contents. And the point of the Jungian existentialism that I've been deploying since the first book is that all contents of experience that we can bring to bear are in theory possibly applicable to any type. Any type can be into philosophy, can be into, my wife's sister is the SFP, and she's a successful philosopher. So you see, all these things are possible. It's about the quality of that experience. So it's more about the how-ness than the aboutness. Okay. So on the basis of this, what can we conclude? One of the first conclusions that you have to make is that the least reliable of the three systems, unfortunately, is the first one. It's the first one because precisely the MBTI model proceeds by way of an implicit confusion between the how-ness of experience and the aboutness of experience. Okay? It's all about, indeed, the aboutness of experience. Right? It says, well, INFJs are INFJs because they're about these things and these traits, so on. And they're not about how they experience these traits, which I explore in the Ecstatic Soul and so on. I'm not going to repeat myself. So one obvious weakness of this model is that, first of all, it's very easy to fake being an INFJ. It's almost as easy to fake yourself into being INFJ. You can convince yourself because you're saying, well, surely I have the same. My experiences on the whole are pretty much about the same things as your typical INFJ as I read about them online, so I must be that. And in a sense, the model entitles them to think that. Okay. Notice the difference with my approach, and I call it Jungian existentialism because although it has this existentialist focus on the phenomenology of experience, the quality of experience, it's also more Jungian, I think, than, in terms of the original Jungian works, than MBTI. Because if you read Jung carefully, particularly his, chapter 10 of personality types, very famous book, really it's about the how-ness of experience for any function, not so much about the aboutness. If you read it again, you'll notice that. So I would claim, therefore, that, my approach, at least in principle, if not perhaps in execution, I leave this to the reader to decide, is superior to the MBTI approach, at the very least in terms of coherently being able to pin down different types objectively. It is certainly objectively about subjective experience, which is totally possible. You can have a model, I've said this before, that is objectively about subjective experience. Doesn't make it any less objective. But subjective experience understood as the first person qualitative how-ness of experience, not about what the thoughts and the experiences are about, because anyone, you can have two people that are completely different types and they're, what they experience is more or less about the same things. So you can't pull them apart into different categories on that basis. Next to that, you have a very other system that is the cognitive type system, that is the ontological system, which is very informative, even if you don't agree with it, is obviously going to be very informative by way of providing information that's not going to be provided by the other models. It's not going to be provided by the other models because the cognitive type approach is objective objectively about objective features. It's not objectively about subjective features. It's objectively about objective features, namely your body language, your voltology, your visual cues, and there is theoretical background behind this particular approach, but ultimately it's going to give you your type on the basis of information that is not captured by the other models. So besides question of reliability, real objectivity, and so on, it's certainly going to give you some new information to cross with the other models. For example, it's very interesting, I find it interesting for myself, to compare what my type is in cognitive type with what my type is in the two other models, right? And I think that the way in which I'm not an INFJ, so to speak, in cognitive type, I'm FENI, but I think that certainly of the three models, the one in which I am the most quintessentially INFJ is my model, Jungian existentialism, the howness of experience, okay? And I make a case for this, not necessarily about myself, but about what it is to be an INFJ in my books, in the Ecstatic Soul and in my next book, which might be called The Infinite Soul. We'll see. This is a little bit of a scoop. But so in a sense, if you read my books, and which are all about the howness of experience, and this is something that immediately viscerally speaks to you, in some sense, this is more evidence than anything that the traditional MBTI can provide, and you're closer to JCF. At least this is my claim. But try to remember, in terms of what you're looking at, whether a model is objectively about objective features, or is it objectively about subjective features, and if it is in that latter category, are the subjective features defined by aboutness of experience or form/howness of experience? By the way, in the aboutness of experience, in addition to MBTI, you obviously have C.S. Joseph too, which leads to same reliability issues, in fact, probably bigger ones for other reasons that I've discussed elsewhere. But you can apply that grid to any model. You can ask yourself, okay, is it objectively about the subjective or objectively about the objective? If it's objectively about the subjective, is it objectively about the formally subjective or the content subjective? In fact, the formally subjective is more reliable because less susceptible to opinion and, similarity of activities and interests in life. Let me know in the comments what you thought, guys, and I will see you on Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.